terrorism resources. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all the witnesses. I'm going to start with the 5-minute round. Professor Pape, great replacement theory is nothing new. Some form of it has been around forever. In the United States, we've seen evidence of it with the activities of the Ku Klux Klan during Reconstruction and even into the 20th century. I grew up in East St. Louis, Illinois, in the early 1900s with the Great Migration. There was a visceral reaction against African Americans that led to a race riot in that city, as well as my current hometown of Springfield, Illinois, and that led to the creation of the NAACP. So we've seen this many times over. The only question that comes to my mind is this a different time? Do you find in your research that the social media approach to information in America is exacerbating this situation? Can we add to that the automatic weapons that are now giving to these madmen who are inspired by this racism the means to kill so many innocent people as they did in Buffalo? Is that the difference?
So there's two big differences, sir. First, we have volatile capabilities, those are the weapons you're talking about, now combined with volatile ideas and beliefs in the mainstream. It's not one or the other. You've got the combination of these two, which is why we're seeing many more of these events in the United States than we are, say, in Britain. And this is a very important combination that's a deadly cocktail that promises more violence going forward. The second big change is that we are now seeing those who advocate the Great Replacement receive political benefits and financial benefits. So if we look at politicians in America in the mainstream are either directly or indirectly stressing the Great Replacement and becoming more popular. Donald Trump, the former President of the United States, is more powerful today as a result of January 6th than he would have been without January 6th. That is a very, very worrisome trend, sir. Media figures, you just showed a number of them, they are more popular today as a result of the Great Replacement. So what we are seeing is we are seeing incentives for more politicians, more media figures to follow in those paths. These are the two big changes today and why we have to be so concerned about the 2022 and especially 2024 election seasons.
Mr. Chairman, let me ask you, we really have a challenge to respect the Constitution and our Bill of Rights and freedom of speech, and yet we see the reality reported to us by law enforcement here in Washington and across the nation that many of these statements are pushing people into extreme behavior, violent behavior. There's no easy way to define a line to be drawn here to respect the Constitution and still keep America safe. What are your thoughts?
I think that the concept of terrorism radicalization that the FBI and Justice Department have embraced isn't established in evidentiary studies. My own experience working undercover, there were people who were ardent neo-Nazis, had memorized parts of Hitler's speeches, were very influenced by the ideology, and others who just liked to make bombs. And this was a group that appreciated their bomb-making skills. So understanding how the violent element operates and how it networks is much more important than understanding the ideology, because there are lots of people who adopt this ideology who are actually against violence. I had people who were ardent Nazis find out who I was hanging out with in the movement and put their arm around me and say, son, you're hanging out with the wrong people. Come work with us. We'll print up a newsletter that we can put out every week. We'll put a suit on you and run you for the school board. We can do things that don't involve violence, because that will get you killed or put in prison, and that won't help the movement. So it's very critically important for law enforcement to understand these differences and understand how the violent element works. And my concern is this radicalization theory pushes law enforcement to want to grab more information from social media or other public forms of communication, rather than focusing on the far, in which millions of people share these bad ideas, instead of focusing on the relatively smaller number of violent acts and understanding how they network. You know, one of the things that the brilliant case agent who worked my first case with me was able to do in Los Angeles was map all the violent criminal acts that were occurring by white supremacists and show how there was some connection between lots of them, and that's what justified the investigation to start doing that investigation. But today, because the FBI puts these in different categories and more often than not defers to state and local investigators who may or may not prosecute those crimes, they don't have knowledge of how the criminal element works. And unfortunately, they don't seem to want it. There have been plenty of opportunities for them to actually collect this data about the violent crimes to understand it better, but they choose not to. And I think that's part of the problem.
It's the points you made earlier, and one that I'll close with here, and that is the reason for the Domestic Terrorism Act that I introduced was the decision of the Trump administration to no longer have a category of white supremacist crime reported to us. They merged it into a violent crime general category so that there would be no distinction. I believe more information is better, particularly when it doesn't expand the authority of the government or give it any new tools, but really reports on the reality of what's happening across America. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Grassley.